Hi there, I'm your host Clive Sirkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. Well, for the next give or take 30 minutes, and knowing who I'm talking to, it's probably going to be give, not take. But anyway, for the next few minutes or so, I have the joy of spending time with one of the most beautiful minds and humans that I get to work with these days. So a big Unstuck welcome to my newish friend, Craig Robinson. Craig, thanks for spending time on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Hey,
And
man,
welcome.
thanks for having me. Thank you. Absolutely. And you're too kind, and you're absolutely overshooting any of all of that stuff about me.
Well, I'm about to get even. So I'm like, talk about overshooting. So when you joined the board, I did like many people did, as I went onto LinkedIn and I look at Craig. So I go, let me tell you about Craig, and I have an angle here, so I'm going to sort of blow a little smoke. But like when you read his resume, it's like ridiculous. So Craig currently is the chief growth officer at Industrious. We'll talk about that. He's on a number of boards. One of them is Philo, where we serve together. Previously, Craig was the global head of Powered by We, which is a WeWork company, and he served on the leadership team there. You were the CEO of Global Services at Newmark Knight Frank, and before that, you were the president of the U.S. region for Colliers. So, like, and just so that we're not, slouching here, we're talking about an MBA at Harvard and an undergrad at MIT. So, listen, by any measure, this is an unbelievable resume, and no doubt, there's a lot that you've gained through those amazing experiences. But my experience, my personal experience, and a lot of people I talk to, it's really the bumps that define the person. It's the bumps that are transformative. It's the ugly stuff that's
Yes.
transformative. And I know we've talked about some of these, but I'd love to get a sense of, as you've gone through this incredible career and this incredible journey, talk about the ugly stuff, the
Yeah.
not so pretty stuff that actually shaped you and made you the better leader and the better mind and the better human. Because I
Yeah.
think there's some great learning there.
I love that you asked this question. I love that you want your listeners to hear and grow, because this is the part that we actually can identify with and connect with, is the lived experience of our pains, our failures, our insecurities, our all of those things. And none of our biographies speak to any of that. And that is really who we are. And those are the things that actually define us. And so I love that you kind of set that out. The truth of the matter is, if I had to flip a coin and, assume that could I end up where I am again, I don't think I would. There's just too many moments where the probability and statistics of someone who grew up in the neighborhood that I grew up, which was not a great neighborhood in Southwest Atlanta. There was, houses where drugs were sold, and my father left when I was just, in third grade. I remember him, leaving and not seeing him for almost 10 years, and just kind of growing up in a household where, it wasn't clear that I would ever make it out that neighborhood, much less to an Ivy League school, or to like these corporate rooms that I didn't even know existed. I didn't even know what commercial real estate was as a kid. And somehow, there was people along the way, a teacher who said, "Hey, Craig, you should be in this class, not that class." Who the heck would, or as I came out of school, someone who said, "Hey, Craig, I really think you should go talk to this guy, and maybe he'll let you work for him." And I had so many of those moments where people sponsored me and put my name in a hat that I didn't even know there was a hat for, or coached me and mentored me, because I just did not have a lot of people in my family, in my immediate environment, who had been in these journeys. And so I just have to say, behind my bio is a whole lot of folks who really were responsible for my success. And then there were so many moments where I was not successful. I will just tell you, I can remember, the first time I had a leadership role. I was president of this division in this company. It was a real estate company, and I'd never managed or led any business. And here I was managing a team of 500 people, and I was scared crapless, right? And imposter syndrome. I
Yep.
was so afraid that I was going to say the wrong things, not look the part. I was young. and everyone reporting to me was much older than me, and I was really, really scared. And I did some of the classic things wrong. Like I was still acting as an individual producer versus being a leader. I wanted to have all the right answers because I was afraid that if I didn't have the right answers, people wouldn't think I was smart. And I wasn't leading. I wasn't giving my team. I wasn't doing a lot of things. And for the first year of that role, I failed to the point where my mentor pulled me over to the side and says, "Craig, you're not going to make it. You've got to
Yeah.
get in and do some things really, really different." And that was really humbling for me, to just know I'm almost about to get worked out of this role, and then to really have to like humble myself and just to kind of go be someone that was uncomfortable for me to be, which is to be a vulnerable person. But that allowed me to like go on later and have a very successful 3 years after that. And it taught me a whole lot about it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be vulnerable. And I've had many, many of those moments over the course of my career. I've been with companies that, like I was with WeWork and you guys have watched the documentary, and just
Yep.
been in really tough environments as well that challenge like who are you as a person when you're going through the fire. And all of those experiences, the failures, the moments of doubt, self-doubt in particular, and then working in environments where it was just lots of uncertainty, I think have in many ways made me a better person, more resilient. And I still am a horribly flawed individual, but I'm okay saying that. I
Right.
really am okay saying that.
But that's key because I think there's three things. There's a lot in there, but the three things. One for me is um, people, you, me, um, find ourselves in these moments of sort of earned circumstance or earned coincidence. Like it's not a coincidence. It's not happenstance that someone lifts you up, opens a door, shows you a way forward, because you're doing things that make them feel that there's hope for you, that there's an opportunity, there's potential there. So I think it's really important. Like when I talk to people, it's like going, you may not know where it's going, but if you show up doing as best as you can and have an incredible sort of open attitude, people are going to create those opportunities for you. That's one. But the other
Mm,
one is like when you were talking, I work for a guy, Jerry, in Canada, and once a quarter we go out to dinner and we have this fantastic dinner, but it would comprise of me like spending half, he had one half a page of like things I did well. And then he had about 18 pages of like narrowly spaced things that I screwed up.
mm,
And like what I felt the first time was like beat the crap out of me. And I remember at the end of it, and it was kind of like that was the worst experience of my life. And his assistant said to me, "Do you know how much time he puts into this? Like I block time for him, and he keeps notes every day, and he invests all this time in you." And when I talked to him the next time about it, he was like, "I've only got a small window of time to set. I believe in you. You have great potential. You
yeah.
have a huge amount of opportunity. You screw so much shit up, but I've only got a small window of time to give you what I got, so you can be as good as you can be." And it's
Mm,
like it changed the way I accepted what he was giving me. I was picking it up in a whole different way because I felt less attacked and more like this person actually gives a shit about me.
yeah. Yeah. Your willingness to be coachable has a whole lot to do with the coach, right? And then oftentimes they say, that people will pretty much take anything you tell them if they think you care and
Right.
care. And how can you care about someone if you don't know them? Which is a lot of the whole idea around what does it mean to be a mentor and be a mentee. A lot of it is having a relationship that gets into trust. Like you see me, you know me, and you're gonna coach me in a way that speaks to my authentic self. But in order to do that, in order to be really coach, you've got to be vulnerable. So what you basically said is I was willing to find somebody to say like, "Hey man, you fucked up." Like this was, and you got to be okay to say, "Hey, I'm failing. I don't know how to do the thing," or
Right.
and that's the only way someone who cares about you can help you if you're willing to say that, and which is a big part of how you opened up, which is being really honest about your journey, right?
Right. And it's like, I know you're a voracious reader and you always make me feel inadequate and you give me your long list of books. Here's the few 14 books you got to read next week. But, one of the books that always stuck with me and, is Carol Dweck's, mindset and the notion of having
Mm,
a growth mindset. And it's
mhm,
so often that I see, because I don't do it as much as you do. And I'd love you to talk about how you help people, because I know you care deeply about helping people get to their full potential and you put a lot of energy into time in that. But part of what struck me around Carol Dweck and her notion of growth mindset is something that I've internalized because it's hard and it requires constant work. But I spend a lot of time talking to the people who I spend time with to try and help and coach and mentor. It's like, I'm going to give you stuff. You can't take it personally. It's very personal, but you can't take it personally on a negative level. You got to go like, what an opportunity to get that input to help me grow because this person believes on my
Yeah.
potential, as opposed to you just hurt my feelings. You
Yeah.
just told me I suck.
That's right.
And I go, you don't suck. What you did kind of sucked, and you could have done it 20 different ways, and it could have been less sucky.
Yeah.
um, but it's like you spend a lot of time helping people.
Hmm.
What's the key, and why do you do it?
Yeah, it's a great
Because
question. By
you
the
have
way,
a lot on, you got a lot on your hands.
well, listen, I wouldn't be here, and I probably won't even get where I'm supposed to go next unless someone like you or someone else who kind of takes the time to help me. And I just felt like it's a universal principle, whether you believe in God or you believe in something else. I generally believe that those who bless others are going to be blessed, and if and there's something about that that's scientific, that is just a truism. And it's not that you do things because you're expecting, like, oh, if I tithe, then I'm going to be blessed. And no, you do it in some ways because it's already been done to you, right? Like, and so I feel like this kind of pay it forward is something I've always just felt very strongly about. And even in my busiest of weeks and moments where I just felt like I had no time, I'd always take time for a one-on-one with someone who's trying to figure out how to get into the real estate space or trying to figure out what to do post college or their MBA. And to me, those have been the most rewarding moments. Even for me, selfishly, I get so much out of that, just really, kind of doing that. One, I feel better, but I also feel like the seat that I have, I'm doing good with it. Like, I am doing good. Like, someone invested in me, and they're seeing an ROI because I'm actually going to like invest in others, and so there's a multiplier effect. And I just, I think it's just one of those kind of universal principles. And I also just kind of going back to your book list. I think Adam Grant is one of my favorites. I love reading his book. And you think about like givers and takers, and also too this whole idea of one of his last book I really love, which Think Again. This whole idea is like, how do you make sure that you yourself are growing and learning and challenging your own conventional wisdoms? And I think some of that is like putting in yourself in spaces to be challenged as you're talking with other folks. Um, so it's just super important. And then I would just say last thing, in the commercial real estate space where I work, really, really small percentage, less than 2% or so are, in the leadership levels are African American, probably less than 1% are women. And I happen to work in an industry that is just structurally and institutionally inaccessible to a lot of people who are smart and deserve a chance to participate in this really, really cool space. And so I also feel a certain obligation to open the door for people who otherwise wouldn't have a chance. I will tell you, the way I got into this industry, commercial real estate industry, I was interviewing for a fellowship, which I ultimately did not get. I had just gotten into B school, and it was this MBA's, kind of scholarship. And
Yep.
the guy who interviewed me for the scholarship was the then head of real estate for a corporation, a large global corporation, and he's African American. And after the thing was done, he says, "Great, you're not going to get the fellowship, but I know you want to get into commercial real estate, and so I'm going to call this brokerage house in New York. It was Cushman and Wakefield. I'm going to call the CEO, and they want to do business with me. So I know if I ask them to do a favor for me, they'll do it." And so he says, "Hey, I'm sure he probably says, I've got this kid. He's from urban Atlanta. He wants to do commercial real estate. Can he come work for you?" For the summer. And I took my vacation because I was still working at Arthur Anderson at the time. And I went
Yep.
and worked for free for this company, Cushman and Wakefield. And it was only because this gentleman, his name was Michael Tapp, made that call that I had a chance. That was my window to get into the industry because he made a call and got me in there. And they would have never even known I existed. I would have never had a shot. But just that one little internship on my resume was the reason why I got a full-time offer after I graduated from B school. I'm sure of it. And
Yep.
it's the reason why I'm sitting in this chair, because one point in time, someone picked up the phone and did something they didn't have to do. And so I also just feel like that's now my responsibility to pick up the phone every time I can.
And the bizarre thing, the amazing thing, is it costs nothing
Costs
to do
nothing.
that. But I like my view is not to sound like, a martyr, but I think that helping others is the most selfish thing you can do. Like, certainly
Mm,
for me, like, because I get so much out of it on multiple levels. One,
yeah, yeah,
just the experience of talking to people who have a different perspective, who are in a different place and different view, like, helps you not get insulated. And because it's very easy to get a little inside baseball and into an echo chamber. So, like,
yeah.
there's that thing. And then there's the other thing, like, for me, seeing someone that you helped do well, or someone that you worked with, or someone that you gave a chance to do like you do, just gave them a stage to go do your thing,
Yeah,
do well. I mean, I keep tracks on my family, if you will, and there's
yeah,
nothing more rewarding than seeing someone who you may have impacted do well. Like,
yes,
because and it's super selfish. It just makes me feel special because I go like, I was part of that journey, and look how amazing they're doing. And there's a guy I worked with, Chris. He had this notion, which is when people think the circle's small, they get nervous about people in the circle with them. But if you
mm,
change your perspective on the size of the circle you're in, you go, there's a ton of room here for all of us, right?
yeah. The abundance
And
mindset. Yeah,
there you
yeah.
go. So,
It's two things that come to mind. One is post COVID. I think we've all been a bit more in touch with our humanity, and all of us have probably known someone who lost their life to COVID. In my family, just in the past year and a half, I've lost six people in my family. Not all to COVID, but many to COVID. But the whole point of the past 2 years, we've just seen a lot of death. And sometimes, in the face of death, you reflect on your own mortality, and in some ways, that's scary. You think about, will I die? And I experienced that. But I also, just coming out of the past, 2 years, I've begun to think about how important it is for me not to leave this earth without doing something important. And so I think about like how I spend my time and does this really matter? If I'm not here tomorrow, did I make a difference? Did I make a difference in the planet with people's lives and the organizations that I care about? And it's a really different litmus test. I kid you not, I really think about everything I do through that lens now. Does this matter? And does it matter not just to me, but does it matter to the world and community around me? And I don't think before COVID, I will just say for myself, but I think this is probably true for a lot of people. We weren't as in tune with one, our own mortality, and the fact that you do have a shelf life of time that you've got to make good on, and what are you going to do with that time? So that's number one. But the other thing too, kind of tying back to your idea and notion about being selfish, I love happiness research, and there's a gazillion books out there. There's no shortage of them, and we're consumed with our own happiness as narcissistic creature that we are. But one of the ones that I really, really love is this idea of the role of money and happiness. Money doesn't bring you happiness, but money, it turns out, does three things that bring you happiness. One is it buys you time, like, hey, it buys you experiences, and the experiences that have a longer shelf life than things. But most of all, it gives you the opportunity to buy things for other people, buying gifts for other people. And there's really lot of research that suggests that a lot of your happiness comes from doing things for other people,
yep,
of which, of course, money can make easier to do, but you don't need money to do that. But there is actually research that suggests that. So I spend a lot of time, particularly now, thinking about, if my life was over tomorrow, was it worth something? Did it mean something to someone other than myself and my own interest? And I haven't always felt good about the answer to that, but I think about it all the time,
it's
and I think we all
crucial.
should. Yeah,
It's funny you bring up happiness, and I've read a few of those books, and some of them I think they're talking about something else other than happiness, but they use that word. But I had a moment where both my kids went to this incredible Montessori school, and the one year they had all the parents in there, and they would say, "What do you want for your kid?" And a bunch of parents said, "I want the kid to be happy," and I was like, in my head, I was like, I'm not sure that would be at the top of my list. But I understand. And the
yeah,
person, I think it was the head of school, but anyway, the person was like, that's the last thing you want because happiness is like a superficial, you know, it's a drug, and you want your children to be content. You
mm,
want your children to be at peace with yourself. But and it made me really think about it. It's like it's a deeper thing, and I think what you said, like I think when you do those things, it's not that, yeah, I guess you are happy in a way, but you feel a deeper sense of like contentment.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
more permanent and deeper, right?
I think what you're saying, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but what I hear you saying, happiness is a mindset,
Right.
right? It's not a state of being. It's not a state of things happening to me that like the sugar that you're talking about that lights up the part of my brain. It is an actual mindset, right? I could have nothing and to your point, be content. There's some real interesting research that supports your point, which is like it's not about happiness, it's about fulfillment, and there's some folks who have really unpacked the kit of parts to fulfillment. And there are three things that I it really resonate with me. One, fulfillment comes from belonging. This idea that I belong to a community, I belong to a group of people that I care about, they care about me. It turns out that Homo sapiens are social animals. We actually probably weren't ever designed
Yeah.
physiologically or otherwise to like be in isolation. So community is important. It's a part of it, whether it's your family, who you work with. Another part of that is purpose. This idea that I have purpose and the things that I'm doing matter to someone and matter to a higher calling or to a goal or to something, but my life matters. And you and I just spent 5-10 minutes talking about like this idea of purpose and so like having that as part of fulfillment. And then the third part is growth. Am I growing professionally, personally? Am I being stretched? And that may mean that at points in time I'm not happy because I'm being stretched. And
Definitely.
we began our conversation with all of those moments in our lives where we just felt inadequate. We felt stretched. We felt like overwhelmed. But in many ways, that was part of the growth, right? Like that's the way the muscle actually grows is by tearing it apart. And so, belonging, purpose, and this sense of growth, it turns out are kind of the big drivers of fulfillment. And I really love that. And I think we all want to be fulfilled in what we do and how we live.
100. There's no question about it. I mean, that's a great pivot, if you will, because we go back to your resume. You look on the purpose on the surface of your resume. You've been, at least for the last significant chunk of time, in the business of structures, of buildings, of spaces.
Mhm.
But when a person gets to know you, which I think by now everyone's getting a sense of who the man is, you're about humans. You're
Mm.
about extracting and enabling and creating an environment for extracting like the full potential of humans. How does that shape how you think about, because you made some choices, powered by we and Industrious, certainly, in
Mhm.
terms of where you've taken your career in the real estate space. It's not about
Yes.
the buildings, my interpretation.
Yeah.
It's about the humans in the building. So how does,
Yes.
and talk about that, and I'd love to hear about the WeWorks, because I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, although it's been
Yeah.
answered and written about and all that bullshit. But from your personal perspective, how do those two things reconcile in your life?
Oh, it's such a great question, and you're so spot on. The commercial real estate space in industry it has for decades, hundreds of years, not cared really about the human being. There was a landlord, which is this feudal concept, I mean, and a tenant, and these are legal entities. Like there was no human ever in even the vocabulary. In many respects, early developers, kind of, you know, love the thing, like build it and they'll come. I'm going to build something and assuming that there will be human beings out there who desire. I'm not building it with the intention of the human experience, the human desire, the human. I mean, and maybe that's just less so for residential and some other things that are more personal. But for the most part, in our industry, we've not had that, and just in the past, kind of 10 years, there's been this kind of awakening, right? That it wasn't about space is about it's about place, and it turned out the place was in service of the human need. And in the office world, it was about what does the human need to be productive, what does the human need to really feel connected to their teammates. And companies like Industrious and WeWork and others were part of the first wave that really took a B2B business and made it a B2C business, like targeting the individual, thinking about the individual and how they want to work, where they want to work, what modes of work, and what types of things do they need in their spaces. And also, too, the same human being who's going to work is also the same human being who's shopping and living someplace. And so all of these things kind of like mesh together in a way that's been really beautiful. And I love that I get to be a part of, a generation of real estate companies that's really thinking about this. We're thinking about productivity. We're thinking about engagement. We're thinking about fulfillment. and the role of the built environment and really, kind of creating that or supporting that, or certainly not getting in the way of it. um, and I love that I get to do that, and for a living. And it's interesting, post COVID, it's been accelerated even further because companies are now saying, "Hey, how do I get talent to come back to work?" Right? Like, hey, I was working in Tulum during COVID, and I kind of liked it, and I now you kind of want people to come back. And it turns out that people really want options.
Right.
People really want to be in community with people because that's part of fulfillment. We talked about that. People want mentors. I've had mentors. It's hard to have mentors and not have relationships. And humans, it turned out, need to be in proximity to each other oftentimes to build trust and relation. So this idea that we can all be virtual and I'll be on the moon, you be on the Pluto, and and we'll do complicated trust-based things, I think is not true. So there's a really important role for space to convene human beings to do these things. And in it, for the first time, companies are really thinking about employees in that way, where what are the things I as a company to do, including with my physical space, to make people want to come work here. And I don't think we figured it out, to be honest with you. I think we're all learning and iterating, but I think for the first time ever, we're listening to humans. We're listening to people. What do
But
you
that,
want? What do you
but that's such a huge point, and it's like the my view of the world, sort of looking back on my whatever 30 years or whatever. Companies, large and small, but mostly large, but I'd say large and small, sort of the best way I can describe it is non-rational escalation of commitment, which is, by the way, I learned it as a real estate term in negotiation. But anyway, the the notion that they lose sight of what they actually were trying to do in the first place.
Mm.
And you talked about choices. I mean, my first guest when I started this podcast, 35 episodes ago, was a gentleman I worked with, Pete Alcamara, and he had this formula of performance is a function of potential minus the inhibitors plus encouragement.
Mm.
And underlying this premise was he says two things which are really one funny and one sad. So the sad one is like companies tend to spend a huge amount of time managing people, right, and managing performance.
Hmm.
And instead of putting all that energy into performance management, why don't you put it into potential management?
Mm.
And the corollary to that is, and the funny part is, like, all these humans that work with you manage to sort of get up in the morning, choose clothes, brush your teeth, make breakfast, get on the bus or the train or the car, find their way to work, pay their
Hmm.
rent, go shopping, like, and none of that's with supervision. Like, they're all
Yeah.
doing it on their own, right? And then they
Right.
come to work, and all of a sudden you need a supervisor. And he goes, "What
Mm.
if your orientation, your logic as a leader is not to be the supervisor, but be the enabler of their potential?" And I
Hmm.
think that sort of could translate in the area of space in this very real conversation debate that's gone on, which tends to get binary, right? You have to
Yeah.
all come into office or you don't. It's like, what are the purposeful, meaningful experiences you want to create in service of an outcome that involves space? Like, when you want people together, to what end? Because if everyone goes in the office, then they start getting into the same usual bullshit routine, which is they jam up their meeting schedule, and it's the
Yeah.
same. So the space has nothing to do with it. So I think there's a real opportunity to have a conversation. To what end? Like,
Hmm.
stop. Not. It's not a debate. Do they come back in or don't come back in? Is what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
And
It's
we
so
get other
true.
outcomes. No.
It is. And the outcomes that people care most about are really, really hard to measure, right? People care about, like, are we more innovative? Are we more collaborative? Are we more productive? And sometimes because we're lazy, and if I can't measure that, I'll just measure something else that I think is a proxy for the thing. Like, how often did you show up? How long were you in the office? And if I'm even more draconian, I'll just be like, well, how fewer resources did you use to do whatever thing you did? And that was a little bit of the old way of thinking about real estate, is like, how can I get the amount of space that you're using to be as little as possible so I could generate effectively more margin on your productivity. Now I think people are, kind of moving to a place of saying, I'm going to assume that people are more productive. And there actually have been some really great, research. Sadal Neely is a professor at HBS. She studied, productivity and where we see it and where we don't see it. But one of the things you just said, I think, is a really important call to action for the folks in the real estate space, which is like, I don't know whether or not someone is more productive or not, but I know there are things that drag on productivity. There are things that get in the way. And like, how can I just get stuff out the way? Like, all right, a long commute. I know, I don't know if you're any smarter, but I know you spent some of your time in the car driving, and that wasn't. How long did you spend in the elevator to get into your? How much time do you spend trying to find a conference room? How much, and can we just remove friction and sand out the gears? And I think a lot of kind of what's happening in the flex world, where flex co-working space that I live in, work in, is how can we put work spaces closer to where people live that are ready to go and easy to access and have all the things you need, including food and drinks and beverages and quiet space for heads down work and collaborations. Like, how can I just put that stuff closer to you when you want it? I can't prove that you're a better person, you're a nicer person, you're a smarter person, but I can prove that we've removed a whole lot of stuff out of your way to being your best self. And that maybe that's where we start.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the operative word you use is friction. Like,
Mm,
in my mind, companies, better performing companies with more content humans,
more
uh,
content.
uh, or companies that have figured out how to reduce as much friction as possible. And I don't think it's naive to think that you'll operate in a frictionless
Right.
organization. But in when you step back, like I see this through Screen Dragon, it's like we go into companies and they go like, the people are overwhelmed, they're overworked, they're frustrated, they getting killed, we're sweating the acid, we're managing margins, and we just went through one of the re-industry, restructure, reorganization, and nothing changed. And you go,
Mm,
well, let's unpack why. And you go, well, what are you using now? We use a technology platform. Is it helping you? No, it just created more work. I spend more time managing the beast than actually doing the work I got hired to
mhm,
do. Or um, where do you spend your time? Well, a good chunk of my time is spent putting together a presentation for who? Senior management. How long does that take? 2 months. How long is the meeting? 1 hour. Did you get a good outcome? No. So it's like, and if companies would sort of step back and go, where is the friction that we are creating, that inhibiting our people from living to the potential that we hired them for?
yeah.
I think we get different conversations and different outcomes versus what's the organizational design of the group or the company, or how many
Hmm.
people do we need.
Hmm.
You miss the point. And I think all the things that you said about how to think about space applies to how do people work as a whole within that space.
Hmm. I
um,
love it.
but
You see, you're not a marketing guy. You're a real estate guy. You
that's
got
the
to do.
nicest thing anyone ever said to me.
Hey, actually, that's a dirty word. Nobody wants to be a real estate person.
Listen,
Um,
my best friend is in the commercial real estate business. So
Everybody
I,
has at
I,
least one.
I have one or two decent people I know in that world.
I also think we're at a moment um, in human history where the relationship between the human and its work
Yep.
is changing. A few thousand years ago, the relationship between a human and its work was to survive. You did work to survive. You would hunt. You would plant food. I mean, like, you worked to live. Like, really, like, there was no greater need. It wasn't for like fulfillment or happiness or any of that kind of stuff. And then like this, there was this kind of this era where you almost kind of like lived to work. I mean, like, most of the history of US was like, we're super productive. I'm always on. I go on the weekends. I'm on my phones. Blah blah blah. Blah. And and it was this kind of idea that if I did all of these things at some point in the future, I'd retire and I can enjoy happiness. But for the time being, society told me it was more important to just be productive. And companies measured that through employee engagement. Like, are you willing to work an extra hour even if I don't pay you? Like, how on are you? And that was a big part of how I grew up, working. And we're in rebellion of that way of thinking about work. No, people don't want to be thought of that way in their relationship with work. People are looking and they're putting a burden on work for a lot of other things, like to speak to their values, to speak to the things they care about. People will actually go to that one page that no one ever visited, which is like, what is your mission? What are your values? People care about that stuff. They care about what your corporate pack is supporting, and they care about what they do and whether they feel connected, whether they have purpose, and whether they're growing more than what you pay them, what their title is, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which is why I think a lot of the startups, were so wildly attractive to this past generation of people. They didn't want to go work for Kellogg or for IBM or Goldman Sachs. They wanted to go work for these companies that like at least espouse that were changing the world. And WeWork had that impact for a long time, recruiting 1,000 people a month because they believed they were changing the world. And it turns out that is part of the human, relationship with work now, is we want to feel fulfilled in the things that we do. And we want the company to see us as individuals, and see our humanity and acknowledge that. And some of that we do through giving them choice. But in all of the ways, I think it's a really powerful thing for us to be like witnessing happening right in this moment. And companies don't know how to do it, including like whether I force you to come back to work or I tell you can do whatever you want. Like we really just don't know how to see someone's individual humanity and and how to, be in service of that. But I can tell you that is the season we're in right now.
No doubt about it. Listen, what I expected would happen, which is we ran out of time and we didn't cover 3 subjects, but the most important one, which is sort of my way of angling you back for another conversation. But you talked sort of, if you think about the arc of our conversation in the notion of opening doors and creating opportunities for people to fulfill their potential, and seeing people's humanity, as you just said. And we kind of touched very peripherally, I'm losing my...
That is a word.
On the need to create opportunities for people of color and women and other groups that have less access.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to get into it in the last 1 minute because I think it's disrespectful to the gravitas of the conversation. So I'd love to put a marker down and ask you to come back. I want to have a conversation about that, a real conversation where we don't sort of talk around the peripheries of it, but really get into it and talk about what is tangible, real, sustainable, meaningful things that people can do, not sort of slogans and headlines, but what can you as an individual do to make a meaningful difference that'll move things forward in a material and sustained way? I'd love to have you come back and talk about that, if you will.
Oh, I would love to. I would absolutely. It's such an important conversation, and we need to have it.
We need to have it, and we need to have it in more than like 1 minute. We need to have at least, a 35, 40, even 1 hour conversation. Craig Robinson, as always, my dear friend, a joy speaking to you. I appreciate your time. I know you've got a board meeting to go to, so thanks for making time. I will see you, I'm sure, soon in the flesh, but thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me and look forward to coming back.
Amen.
All right. Take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit screendragon.com to see our software in action.